People have disappeared over lunch. Okay, if you can take your seats, please. So I hope everybody had a good chance to talk and even eat over lunch. So the next session is looking at the impacts of speeding on Irish roads. So once again, can I encourage people to share their thoughts on social media at RSA Ireland using the hashtag #RSAConf 2022. So we're starting with Donna Price, founder and chairperson of International Road Victims Partnership, member of the UN RSC and Irish Road Victims Association. So please join me in welcoming Donna.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been invited here today to speak to you very briefly as a bereaved mother, to give the victim's perspective, the human impact, indeed, the reason why we are all here today. I'm very conscious of the fact that there are other bereaved families with us here today also who have similar experiences. Elber, Karen, Leo, and Michael are just 4 of whom I met here today. This could be any one of our stories. My own 18-year-old son, Darren, was killed in a road traffic collision while he was travelling to college on the 30th of March, 2006. Darren was just one of 365 people killed on Irish roads that year. He left our home for college on the 30th of March, 2006. Darren was tragically killed at 8 a.m. through no fault of his own in a head-on collision with the driver of a heavy goods vehicle. The fatal crash occurred on a straight stretch of road, the main route from Dublin to Galway. The driver of the other vehicle, in his statement to the Gardaí, said he didn't see Darren's car until it was within a metre of his lorry and collided with him without braking at 90 kilometres per hour. The horror of that violent impact will haunt our family forever, and we are utterly heartbroken at the loss of our lovely son and brother. At just 18 years old, Darren had already achieved so much. He was an accomplished basketball player who played college basketball at international level for Ireland. But as I address you here today from Croke Park, the home of the GAA, I must say that it was Gaelic football that was his first love. It was his life. And the GAA and Darren's club, the Downs in Westmeath, were a lifeline to us in our time of need and when we were in utter despair. Just a few months before his untimely death, Darren had tugged out for his local club, the Downs GAA Club, as they played and won the county championship that year. A wonderful occasion for our club, and Darren was so proud to have been a part of that and to be presented with his county championship medal. In recent weeks, as we played out those county championships, those same county championships, the Downs won again for a second time, 17 years later. Poignantly for us, our beautiful, talented son, one of the Downs star players, wasn't on the winning team this time. News of my lovely son's death was given to me by a Garda who phoned me while I was en route to Dublin City. The news no parent ever wants to receive was relayed to me when I managed to pull in to the side of the road in the rush hour traffic. My son's name and date of birth were confirmed with me before I was told he had been involved in a fatal collision near Kilbeggan. My worst nightmare as a mother had been realised. My whole world was shattered in an instant. Stomach on the floor, it felt like a grenade had just obliterated my entire being, and I could feel the blood draining from my body with the shock. The worst part, however, was the feeling of helplessness, not being able to fix it for my lovely son. Nobody deserves to die so needlessly, least of all my lovely, smiling, happy boy, who was described as a cult hero among young people in our area by none other than Patrick Doherty, the head of operations of the GAA here. Everybody who knew Darren idolised him, and he was just starting out in the world with his whole life ahead of him. As a parent, everything we do is for our children, and there was now nothing I could do for Darren. How do you come to terms with burying and never seeing your child again? It's absolutely unbearable. Losing a child has to be the worst thing that can happen to any parent. But to lose them where their death could and should have been prevented makes their sudden, violent death even more difficult to bear, if that were possible. It wasn't an incurable illness that had taken my son's life. Instead, he had been killed in a totally avoidable crash, and that made his death so much harder to accept. To make things even more difficult for bereaved families, we are thrown into dealing with the legal processes which follow such sudden and unnatural deaths. Processes we know little about, which we have not chosen for ourselves, and where there is little or no assistance provided for us. At a time when we are not only dealing with the sudden, shocking death of our loved ones, often our own child, we must also try to deal with the horrific aftermath. The family's shock and trauma, and an unexpected funeral of our child. The police investigation, the Director of Public Prosecutions, the criminal or civil court processes, and finally, the coroner's inquest or public inquiry into our loved one's death. These legal processes often drag on over a very lengthy period, with behind-the-scenes deliberations being carried out into the circumstances surrounding the crash in which our loved one has been killed. a criminal justice process that we are not a party to and which keeps bereaved families very much on the periphery. Lying awake at night, every night, for weeks, months, and even years on end, wondering what could have caused the crash in which our loved ones have lost their lives. For me, this process continued for 6 years as the inquest into Darren's death took place in March 2012, following a very long, prolonged investigation prompted by questions asked by the family, which prompted a more thorough investigation. A very traumatic 6-year period, which had a very serious impact on not just me, but on my whole family. This lack of information and support, and having to fight for every little piece of information of the circumstances surrounding the death of our loved ones, actually leads to victims being re-traumatised. It is cruel beyond words. The right to information and support in such harrowing circumstances without undue delay must be a basic human right. While I am happy to say that things have much improved since 2006, with the introduction of forensic collision investigators, mandatory testing for intoxicants, and family liaison officers being appointed to every family affected, there is still more to be done. Collision investigation is key to both justice for our families and prevention. If the police crash investigations fall short, everything else falls too. Families don't get the information and justice they rightly deserve, and our road safety efforts and any legislative reform required cannot be truly evidence-based. The police investigation not only forms the cornerstone for justice for the unfortunate victims and their families, but it also forms the basis for our prevention work in the road safety sphere. The required interventions to make our roads safer are also much more difficult to introduce, as they require prompt, comprehensive, and accurate data from these investigations. For our families, justice may not mean lengthy prison sentences. Instead, it can mean lessons being learned from our loved one's death or serious injury. Lessons must be learned from these sudden, violent deaths so that our loved one's deaths will not have been in vain, and so that we may spare the lives of others in their honour, maybe even your own life. We don't ever want your family to get that phone call or knock on the door to tell you your loved one has been killed. And believe me, it can happen to anybody. Following Darren's death and the inquest into his death in 2012, I founded IRVA, the Irish Road Victims Association, the national charity for road crash victims in Ireland. IRVA is primarily a victim support organisation providing free bereavement counselling and legal advice to families affected while advocating for their rights. IRVA is run entirely by volunteers, and I'm happy to say that I'm joined here today by two of them, Karen Newman and Leo Liegio, two of our wonderful volunteers. We support bereaved families as they deal with the horrific impact of their loved one's loss. We hold monthly support group meetings, and we have a helpline which is open 7 days. On the third Sunday of November every year, several hundred bereaved families, the injured and the emergency services, travel from all corners of Ireland to attend our event in commemoration of the UN World Day of Remembrance for Victims of Road Trauma. This most poignant of events provides some solace and comfort to the bereaved and injured as we gather together with people who truly understand our loss, to remember and honour our departed loved ones. Those bereaved and injured who come to our event and return every year now count IRVA as their new family. All of our charity services are provided free of charge. 5 years ago, I founded the International Road Victims Partnership, which I co-chair with Vivian Perone from Argentina. IRVP is a global partnership of some 160 NGOs from all regions of the world, many of which are victim-led, all working together to improve the post-crash response, to support the unfortunate victims and their families, and to improve victim support services. Through reciprocal agreements, our NGOs can get help to victims no matter where they may live in the world, transcending language and other barriers. We never want victims to feel isolated and alone as they attempt to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. As a member of the UN Road Safety Collaboration, we work with all stakeholders to implement the UN Global Plan for the Decade of Action for Road Safety, which aims to halve deaths and serious injuries by 50% over the next 8 years. For all of us, Vision Zero is the only acceptable target, knowing as we do the utter devastation caused by just one death. If we are to achieve our target to cut deaths and serious injury by 50% by 2030 and reach Vision Zero by 2050, we must improve serious crash investigations and the quality of the data we are collecting. While things have improved considerably since Darren was killed, there is still much room for improvement. We must also enact and, most importantly, enforce better legislation. It's the same penalty here for going 1 kilometre over the speed limit as it is for going 50 kilometres over the speed limit. We must have effective deterrents which reflect the danger imposed by law-breaking drivers. Speed, as we know, is one of the main contributory causes of crashes, and the impact speed very much determines the outcome. As we have heard from other speakers here today, and we'll hear next, I'm sure, from Dr. Keith Sinnott, the National Clinical Lead for Trauma Services. And lastly, I want to use my voice here today to call for further improvement in roads policing, which is so important for all of us, while also acknowledging the great work that the Gardaí do. We must properly resource our wonderful officers in An Garda Síochána so that we can have a much more visible Garda presence on our roads. As the late Gay Byrne famously said, we are simply not seeing enough yellow jackets on our journeys. Enforcement of our road traffic law, the gathering and preservation of evidence when the worst happens, and the timely sharing of data to assist in prevention, together with effective deterrents which deter law-breaking road users, are all vital requirements for safer roads for all of our families. Together, we can and must make Vision Zero a reality. We must also act urgently, remembering as we do that every life lost and injured on our roads is one too many. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, I'm almost speechless. Thank you for that reminder of the real victim and victims of road safety. So, as Donna said, the next speaker is Keith Sinnott, consultant orthopedic and spine surgeon and Ireland's national clinical lead for trauma services, and he's going to talk about the effects of speeding on trauma injuries.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Donna. I don't know that I've ever quite felt so inadequate getting up to give a speech before and a talk, but hopefully I can say some of the things you wanted to say about what can happen with speeding and trauma. I'm a little bit taken aback, if I'm perfectly frank. Thanks for the introduction. Keith Sinnott is my name, and I'm an orthopaedic and spine surgeon working just up the road here in the Mater, and I'm also the National Clinical Lead for Trauma Services. And in both of those roles, I have a kind of a peculiar place in the road safety space. In my day-to-day job, I don't want to see bad injuries. I don't want to be up in the middle of the night fixing people. I don't want to do any of that. So I want people to slow down so we don't have crashes, so I can stay in bed. That's just kind of lazy and selfish, I suppose. A big part of my job is trying to reorganise trauma systems in Ireland to try and address how we can deal with people comprehensively. It's a huge body of work. It's a massive piece of change management. And like all pieces of change management, it attracts an amount of criticism, which I kind of bear. But again, what I want to do is to bring in a system that becomes redundant because there are no road traffic victims and road traffic crashes as time goes by. And again, what I've been asked to do today is to talk about the effect of speeding and velocity on trauma and what happens. Now, I have got a personal interest quite beyond my professional interest in this. This was me in my holidays 2 weeks ago, okay? I drive a great big motorcycle which goes very quickly. So I have an interest in speed, and I know you heard this morning about the psychological reasons why people like to go fast. I don't. I'm a chicken. I try to go slowly when I can, and I'll tell you about that in a second. And you've heard about epidemiology, and you've heard about various different kind of things. So I'm going to kind of give a little bit of a different approach to it. And what I'm going to really talk about, I suppose, is about physics. And one of my favourite laws, and excuse me to the guards because they've got lots more laws than I have, the first law of thermodynamics, also known as the law of conservation of energy. And what that states, if anybody can remember their leaving cert physics, which I bet you probably can't, is that energy can be neither created nor destroyed, merely converted from one form to another. Now that sounds like a really esoteric thing, but actually it's something that's relevant to us all, you know, wherever we go. And energy is defined as the ability to do work, okay? And when it comes to trauma, the work that's done is to cause injuries. So energy does work to cause an injury. And when the more energy that's transmitted to a person, the more injuries they will sustain, the greater the severity of injury will be. It's pretty straightforward and pretty simple as that. The more energy transferred to a patient, the greater the injury that they will sustain. And there's lots of ways in which energy can be transferred. So it can have chemical energy, you can get burns, you can get electrical energy, which can cause all kinds of problems with shocks and different kinds of things and stuff. Thermal energy, even nuclear energy, please God, this won't be something that becomes more relevant to us given the things that are going on in the world at the moment. But a lot of what we'll speak about, or I'll speak about, is mechanical energy. And there's different types of mechanical energy, and that's kind of really where speed and velocity comes into what creates trauma. And when we talk about mechanical energy, there's two types of mechanical energy, principally. One is potential or gravitational energy, and the other is kinetic energy. Now, I told you about my holidays, and I always get the opportunity of a few holiday snaps. This is the road from Kotor in Montenegro up the back of the eponymous Black Mountain to Katinje. You can see it hairpins up and down the mountain all you go. If you go on Google and look up the world's most dangerous roads, this road will often come up. So, of course, once I heard it was the world's most dangerous road, I had to go and drive it, even though Google tried to make me avoid it. And going up that road is a bit of a kind of a, buttock clenching kind of thing for a couple of different reasons, because it's kind of dangerous. And as you go up the road on your motorcycle, you will gain potential energy. The higher you are, the further you can fall, the more potential energy is. And truthfully, that's what scared the life out of me when I was going up, because I don't like heights very much. But the other thing that happens when you travel on your motorcycle is you gain kinetic energy, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, because that's where speeding comes into it when we talk about what the effective injuries are. So, gravitational or potential energy. As I said, the higher you go, the more energy you have within you. When you fall, it's liberated to the body and it causes all your injuries. And there's an equation for it: mass times gravity times height. And the further something falls, the more energy there is. But the thing is, it's kind of directly responsible. So if you double the height, you double the energy, you double the amount of injury. So if you're lucky and something kind of falls on you, nothing more serious than this happens. But you're not always so lucky. Kinetic energy is a little bit different. And if you look at the equation, and this is not really a maths lecture, I suppose, but the thing about it is that the energy is proportional to the velocity squared. It's not just double the speed, you double the amount of energy. And we kind of all got a bit used during COVID to things like exponential curves. When we followed the numbers and with our hands behind our, looking at it from behind the couch, they kind of rapidly went up. That's exponential growth. And the key with this is with energy. If you double the amount of the speed that you're going, you quadruple the amount of energy. So kinetic energy is a much more important way in which you can accelerate the amount of energy that you get. So when I was going up the mountain in Qatar, I was scared witless. I just got that right. And I only went to 30 kilometers an hour. I wasn't going very quickly. So the amount of kinetic energy I had wasn't great. So the potential energy was a bigger issue for me. If I'm going at 120 kilometers an hour and I can accelerate on my bike from 30 to 120 in a couple of seconds, I don't do it, guards, ever. I hope you didn't catch my number on it. But that quadruples my speed, which means the amount of energy, kinetic energy, that is liberated if I'm in a crash is 16 times greater. It's a huge, big difference. So speeding is really important when it comes to the amount of energy transmitted to a patient, which leads to the injuries. And it's directly related to the severity of the injury. So physics kind of matters. To give you an idea of the effect of kinetic energy, this is just a video of a bullet going through some kind of pools of water. And as you can imagine, it hits the first pool quickly and it slows down and hits the second pool more slowly. And the amount of splashing and the disruption is an idea of the energy. So on the kind of high energy bullet, you get a lot of disruption. Low energy, it just kind of comes to a stop. So kinetic energy really matters when it comes to causing injuries. So from the patient's perspective, what happens? Well, you fall off your bike at low speed. You're likely to get a low energy injury, something like we see on the right here, a simple callus fracture, not life-threatening, not limb-threatening. The question is, do you need to brace it or not? Very simple injury, doesn't have a big effect. Low energy injuries, easy to manage, not desperately severe. If you're going a little bit quicker though, and even if you're lucky enough that all you do is injure your wrist, it's not a low energy injury. It's an open fracture with the bone smashed to smithereens, with the skin broken, maybe tendons, maybe nerves, maybe blood vessels. You might lose your arm. You certainly won't be playing the piano again anytime soon. So energy really matters when it comes to determining the kind of injury that you have. Tibial fractures. If you're out in Croke Park every now and again, particularly with the hurlers, when they whack a fella with a hurl, you might get a simple transverse fracture. The biggest problem with this when you fix it is, when will he get back? Will he be as good as he was before? That's the level of concern a low energy injury can give to somebody. So the amount of trauma that's involved is much lower than might be the case if you have something like this. If you come off your motorbike without wearing leathers and you have a massive open fracture with lots of skin loss, you might bleed to death. You might end up losing your leg. You might end up with compartment syndrome. That's a limb-threatening injury. You're never going to be the same again after it. Speed really matters. There's no such thing as a trivial head injury. Okay, repetitive injuries even of this nature can cause problems down the road. But if this is what happens to you, you might see a few stars, you might even lose consciousness, but hopefully you won't get a significant injury down the road. If you're going fast and this happens to you, and this is the classic bullseye, not wearing a seatbelt, going too quickly, runs into something, and you see this, you've got a severe catastrophic brain injury. These aren't things that you can recover from. These are things that cause significant disability for long terms. And people sometimes don't survive them at all. I'm going to be really brutal with my next comment, so please excuse me. Sometimes the best outcome of an injury like this, if you're going at speed, is to produce a good organ donor. Speed really matters when it talks about injuries. In my world, we look after pelvic injuries, and very often they are low energy injuries, somebody who has a simple fall from a standing height. That's the commonest cause of trauma at the moment. And if your bones are a little bit weak, you might have a fracture like this to your pelvis. The biggest challenge managing a patient with a fracture like this is encouraging them that the fracture doesn't really matter, that they're better off getting up and walking and doing as much as they can. It's not a big problem at all. Low energy injury, easy to manage. The thing to do is encourage people to walk. A high energy pelvic fracture is an entirely different beast. So the pelvis is one of the strongest bones in the body. If it's smashed to smithereens, all the organs that it normally protects, your bowel, your bladder, your blood vessels, all of which can be injured. These kind of injuries can sometimes lead people to bleeding to death. It can have them ripping their nerves out of their spine, leaving them, significant neurological deficits. People can have bladder problems, bowel problems forevermore. If you're unlucky enough to have an open fracture, your mortality is over 50%. Massive difference if you're going quickly. My day job is looking after people with spinal injuries. 4 weeks before I went on my holiday, and this is a real holiday, it wasn't just a pretend holiday, I was rear-ended on my motorbike. Much worse on a motorbike than on a car because you really hyperextend. Thankfully, the driver was going slowly, just lost attention, that's all it was. And when I had a bit stiff and sore and cuts and bruises, my biggest problem was replacing my bike for my holiday. I still went away, that's all that it was. A low energy injury, not terribly severe. This is a different beast altogether. These are the kind of things that do get me up at bed at night. You may or may not be familiar with looking at these x-rays. This is somebody's neck that's dislocated in 2 places. And if you look at an MRI scan, you can see that their spinal cord is disrupted and won't repair, no matter what you do. So this patient is not going to walk again. They might not be able to use their arms again. They might be like Clark Kent, Superman, not be able to breathe in themselves. They won't be able to manage their bowel or their bladder. They'll have to have a catheter in for life. I won't tell you what they have to do about their bowel. This is a catastrophic injury caused largely by the effects of speed. So the maths are pretty simple, and you don't need to be this fella to try and work it out. Energy causes injury. I think we've given up. Speed is a source of energy. Kinetic injury comes from going fast. That's what it is. If you double the speed, you quadruple the amount of energy that's transmitted. Speed has a significant effect to exponentially increase the amount of energy that's transmitted to a patient. And therefore, the severity of the injury quadruples, the likelihood of surviving decreases by a factor of 4. So, speed can turn a minor injury into a major injury. It can change what you need to worry about very quickly. It can turn a limb-threatening injury to a life-threatening injury. And as Donna so eloquently told us, speed can mean the difference between life and death. So when it comes to addressing speed, you can go quickly and you might be a little bit lucky, like some of the people in this video, and you might manage to avoid significant or severe injury. Or you can plan in advance and you can try and reduce people's speed, reduce the amount of energy, reduce what's likely to happen, and make the roads a much safer place. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Keith, for another set of horrifying pictures about the effect of speed on the human body. So the final speakers today are Marid Forsyth and Justin Fleming from the Love 30 campaign, and I think they're going to be following up on Rod King's plea for 30 kilometres an hour. So Marid and Justin.
Hello, everybody. As I say, I'm from the Love 30 campaign for 30 kilometre an hour speed limits. And I don't know that you need to hear from me after the last 2 speakers. I think Donna's moving testimony on the effects of a road traffic collision on a family and on people and on lives, and Keith's physics lecture. I think they both demonstrated very clearly that we need that speed kills, and we need and it kills and it injures, and as we've heard all day, lower speeds mean fewer injuries, fewer deaths, and fewer collisions. So now I should have started my slide. I'll just show you, this is a basic Love 30 leaflet. You can see there I can't even remember which way around it is, but anyway, at 60 kilometres an hour, 90% of pedestrians hit in a collision will die. At 50 kilometres an hour, 50% will die, but at 30 kilometres an hour, only 10% will die. So you've reduced the prospects of death by 90% just by slowing your speed from 50 to 30. So that's why we campaign for 30 kilometre an hour speed limits. The road safety strategy, I'm sure I don't need to show this slide to anybody here. We're trying to have the number of deaths and serious injuries by 50% over the next 10 years and get to Vision Zero by 2050. So I'm looking really at trying to have those collisions, which is still far too many deaths and serious injuries over the next 7 or 8 years. And if you look at the statistics for this year, and the sad thing about it is, when I prepared my slides, I took a date of the 30th of September and at the 23rd of September, and at that stage there had been 113 deaths. Today, as far as I know, the figure is 122. So even as we're organising this, the number of people affected is changing. But what I really want to focus on here is the number of pedestrian and pedal cyclist deaths. That's 30 out of 123. So that's a huge percentage of the people being killed on our roads, and also a huge percentage of the people being injured. So if you look then at the speeds at which different kinds of road users are being killed, the red is at 50 kilometres an hour, and at the number of pedestrians 84% of pedestrians are killed in 50 kilometre an hour zones, and 75% of cyclists are killed in those zones. So if we want to reduce the number of people killed and injured, it makes absolute sense to reduce the speeds on those 50 kilometre an hour roads. I'm not saying we don't need to reduce other speeds, but just on those roads. So that's why, as a campaign, we're looking for 30 kilometre an hour speed limits in residential areas, in our town and village centres, and where people congregate. And we've been looking for this for some years, and since 2020 we've changed our demand. We're looking for a default 30 kilometres an hour in built-up areas. And the impetus for this is, first of all, the argument that we need to reduce the speeds, we need to reduce speed limits, but we also have which Rod King mentioned earlier, the Stockholm Declaration of 2020, to which Ireland is a signatory, and then again, following on from that, the UN Declaration, and now the UN Decade of Road Safety, and we're party to all of these. So there's an obligation on us to bring in 30 kilometre an hour speed limits where vulnerable road users such as pedestrians and cyclists and motor vehicles mix. So there really is a huge impetus there for us to do this. You've also seen from the statistics that Rod showed us this morning that we will be following international example. You know, Spain, Wales, Netherlands, and now the Scots are about to bring in a default 30 as well. Also, I think if you drive around Europe, you'll see that there are far more 30 kilometre an hour speed limits in urban areas in our continental neighbours than there are here. So I think we're only following international best practice in bringing in a default 30 kilometres an hour. Now, so far I've been talking about safety, but one of the other of the 7 pillars of the road safety strategy is for safe and healthy modes of travel. So, you know, we're trying to encourage, if we want safe and healthy modes of travel, we want more people walking, cycling and using public transport. So to achieve that, we need to make our roads safer and we need to make our roads more livable. So this is a street party in Stony Batter, which is what you can do when you reduce traffic speeds or eliminate traffic from the road for a while. The other thing about it is that if you reduce speeds, you will encourage more people to move around safely. And there's loads of international evidence on this, that lower speeds encourage people to walk and cycle more. It makes our roads and streets more sociable. And as I think Rod pointed out earlier, you have less noise and less pollution. And there was a study done recently in Dublin about to measure what people were doing. And it measured the speeds that cars were doing, and it counted the pedestrians, bikes, cars, heavy vehicles across Dublin. And it measured the V85, that's the 85th percentile speed, so that's 85% of traffic were observing that speed limit. And they did it over a year, and they counted the pedestrians versus speed. And you can see on this chart, I think it's self-explanatory, that they're around about 25 kilometres an hour is where you will get a maximum number of people walking. So if you want safe and active modes of travel, you've got to reduce speeds, and particularly speeds in our urban areas. And there's another slide showing this. Here we are. That just shows it in a slide. Maybe it's easier for those who are used to graphs. reading it. But again, 25 to 30 kilometres an hour is the speed at which you will get most people walking. And the other thing is that, you know, where you introduce lower speed limits, and again, this is a Dublin study, and I'm sorry, this is a little bit, the figures I have are a little bit Dublin-based because these are just the ones that came to me. But, I mean, obviously these arguments apply to every city, town and village in Ireland. And on Strand Road in Sandymount, the speed limit was reduced from 50 to 30 to enable roadworks. And for roadworks, and you can see that there was a huge decrease in the speed. And I think, I mean, a reduction from 50 to 37 is practically a halving of KSIs. Now, what are we doing with speed limits in Ireland? We've been doing 30 kilometres an hour for a while, and it's being done, but it's being done very, very slowly. And you can see from these charts, blue is good, red is bad, right? So that's Connacht, that's Munster, you've one dark blue there. In Waterford, you've Ulster, no dark blue, only one blue. Leinster has a few more blues. So really, we're not going fast enough. We're taking far too long. Now, I've been speaking to people in local authorities here today. It's a huge job to bring in 30 kilometres an hour speed limits. So what we're looking for is we're calling for a default national legislation for 30 kilometres in built-up areas. And the exceptions would be where higher speeds are shown to be justified. It reduces the cost of introducing it, it reduces the cost of maintaining it, and it will reduce our speeds tremendously and lead to less people like Donna and Keith having to get up and speak at a conference like this. So I go back to something, I told Rod King I wanted to steal one of his slides. Can Ireland be next? We did the smoking ban, why not a default 30 kilometres an hour? Thank you, everybody. I'll hand over to Justin.
Good afternoon, and I'm pleased to be able to play some part in the conference today, and that I think much of what we're trying to achieve has already been outlined by other speakers. So we're thrilled to have receptive ears and perhaps to be pushing at an open door. So it's exciting, I think, because my impression is that things are optimistic and that Ireland is going to introduce a default 30 kilometre an hour speed limit sooner or later. And the question really is, when are we going to do it and how are we going to do it? So my main point in my slides, if they're to present themselves, are that we've got the figures, for instance, of the risk of death if you're hit by a car at the different speeds. So I'd like to go into that later, but just to introduce myself, if I may, I am a young male in my 20s, so I'm in this category that are unfortunately, you know, overrepresented in the figures for posing a danger to people on the roads. And just to say as well, I'm not particularly different, I think, to people who are in their 20s. So the reason I'm here really is and the reason I'm involved in Love 30 is for this reason, because it seems to me just to be common sense that we ought to have 30 kilometre an hour as the default speed limit in our built-up areas where human beings are mixing with traffic. And so 3 things that, as regards to how are we going to get there? The first thing is, as Marita said, we want to change the law so that the existing default speed limit is moved from 50 kilometres an hour to 30 kilometres an hour. And as you can see in the slide, it's self-explanatory really, and I'm going to talk later on about people's minds and changing attitudes towards it because it's relevant. Unfortunately, even though the speed limits are 50 kilometres an hour, people regularly break them and they go above 50, they might even go 60. And as you can see, that's a death sentence, unfortunately, if you've the misfortune to be hit by a car at that speed or whatever vehicle it might be. And so I'll deal with that in a second, but just for so the law is the first thing, and there's 2 other things. So this is another thing we'd like to see changed. It's the guidelines for setting and managing speed limits in Ireland, and it's proven to be a bit of an obstacle for us in the work that we've been doing because local authorities often cite it as a reason why 30 kilometres an hour speed limits shouldn't be more widely introduced. Because, for instance, this document says that the areas where they're proposed 30 kilometre an hour limits should be self-enforcing. Now, of course, there's a lot of work to do to make them self-enforcing in the line of engineering and physical changes that need to be made. But I've just one slide for a reason, really, because I want to emphasise how common sense it is that really, it should just be 30, end of story, and we can back it up with the physical changes as time goes by. So we agree, of course, that it should be self-enforcing, but really it should just be there, full stop. And the evidence is that once it is introduced, 30 kilometre an hour zones, although people may continue to break the speed limit, they do in fact reduce their speeds. So it's worthwhile doing. So the third matter that we need to change, and I'm so glad that we've got an audience here with the Road Safety Authority, because there's great experience and capacity there already to campaign and to advocate and to try to change people's minds and attitudes. And I think we really do need to do that with speeding, because I'll tell you a story of 3 different friends of mine, and they have different attitudes towards road safety and towards obeying, unfortunately, road traffic laws. So, and some strangers as well as my friends. But my first friend, he unfortunately, I regularly need to ask him to put on his seatbelt, imagine, when he gets into the car. So I have to bug him all the time to do it. And, it seems to me to be quite an obvious thing to do, that we have indeed changed the social norms around wearing a seatbelt. So I've no hesitation in doing that. However, there's another friend, and I think, unfortunately, he's a good example of where the public at large is at, and that is that often if he's a passenger in the car, I'll drive, for instance, at 48 kilometres an hour, we'll say, in a 50 kilometre zone, and he'll complain to me that I'm going dangerously slow and that I should hurry up, that I might cause an accident. So, this is honestly what's going on, and we need to be aware of that, and we need to clamp down and be a bit more specific, I think. Beyond speeding, we need to, and I refer again, that's why I just have one slide, because we need to really, I think, focus on this point, the risk of death if you're hit by a car at these different speeds. So I refuse to break the law, and I keep saying to him, I'm not going to break the law, I'm not going to go any faster, and I'm quite firm in my views on that. And now my third friend, who I think might be the most law-abiding of them all, and he refers, for instance, to the Phoenix Park, where 30 kilometre an hour has been introduced recently. And he'll say, well, I think it is quite slow. It is fairly slow, really. And unfortunately, people don't seem to be, obeying it. But what he has said, though, is that even though he himself doesn't go 30 kilometres an hour in the area, he does keep in the 30s. So that's anecdotal evidence, I think, to substantiate what we've already known, which is that even though people might continue to break the speed limit, it does, in fact, reduce speeds. So I think, as regards social norms and changing people's perceptions about speed and the dangers of it, we really need to hit home this image to them and the risk of death at different speeds. So we're going to continue to do it in Love 30, and we hope with your help in the RSA in particular, with the campaigning power that's there and the experience that's proven so effective in the past on other issues, that we might be able to drive this message home to people. Because in the meetings we've had with politicians and spokespersons and the minister, they've all been receptive to us, they've listened to us. And really, people who do raise concerns, and their valid concerns, are that, people are breaking the speed limit already at 50. So surely we ought to focus on getting them to obey the law as it is before we go further to 30, because it is quite a big change. But really, yes, of course, they should be obeying the law. But I think 30 stands on its own merits, really, apart from that, for the simple reason of how likely it is that we can save lives at that lower speed. I think each time that we go into a village, town or city, and you can see as you enter the speed limit that's up, and it's 50 most of the time, unfortunately, it's an indication of our values and our identity. So I refer to my slide 50, as you can see. Basically, it's, you know, it's hit or miss. It's 50-50 whether or not you'll survive if you're hit by a car in this place. And we don't think that's appropriate, really. So we're advocating for 30, so that every place in Ireland, we put people first. The people who live there. Children in particular, I think, because we spoke earlier, for instance, about statistics and the measurements of success and Vision Zero, zero road deaths and halving road deaths and serious injuries by 2030. But what about things that we can't measure? People's freedom, people's ability to go outside and play without constant supervision from their parents and without the risk of death. Because unfortunately, if people are going above 50, it means you're almost certain to be killed if you make a human error and you err by going out onto the road without checking if you're in a state of excitement or whatever. And surely that's unacceptable and we need to do something about it. I think, you know, if we were to start in the morning and decide what kind of a country we'd like to live in, no one would really stand up and say 50 is appropriate, because it clearly isn't. So although 50 is the case at the moment, it's not enough to say it's too difficult to make the change, because yes, you're making a change by changing to 30. You're making a decision to change based on sound reasons. But if you stay as it is, you're also making a decision. And I don't think that's a tenable decision to make, really. And the public might have concerns about 30, fair enough. But that's not good enough grounds to stop moving to 30. It's grounds to address those concerns, to listen to them, and try to see what can be done to make it a success, because it is so important. We need to put the people who live in an area first, instead of Tom, Dick and Harry, who might be trying to get from A to B as quickly as possible. And to deal with what my friend earlier on in the Phoenix Park about 30 being so slow said, well, isn't that the whole point of it, really, to slow down and to reduce speeds because of the implications for that? Now, you might, I mentioned the statistics earlier and measurements of success. So you might say, well, look, it's negligible, really, how many people are being injured in these areas. Oh, you know, we can deal with that later. We'll deal with areas where we can have more of an effect now in the immediate future. But I think that if we can press home this message about 30 and 50 and the likelihood of death at the different speeds, even if somebody is in a rural area, because I know Ireland could be different to other countries because we've got quite a high rural population where the speed limit might be 80. So it's guaranteed that you'd be killed if you were hit by a car at that speed. I think if people were aware of this and if they realised how dangerous it is to travel at different speeds, then perhaps voluntarily they might decide, if they're on a rural area and they can see someone out walking or with a buggy or walking dogs or cycling or whatever, that they might just have the sense to slow down. And that could help us. So it's not about enforcement, I suppose, and penalties so much, although of course they're very important as well. And Ireland seems to be quite a ludicrous outlier, really, as regards to penalties. But on the more positive side, trying to get people to believe in this because it's the right thing to do. And we're all proud to live in Ireland and we want to be active citizens making a difference. So I've mentioned children and their freedom, but something else as well that we need to mention, and you can't mention it often enough, I think, and that's climate change. So it's an existential crisis and we have to deal with it. And it's personal to me as someone in their 20s because it's going to greatly affect my life, my quality of life, and it's very, very concerning. And in order to respond as is needed, we have to dramatically change. We have to go beyond electric vehicles and we have to change how we move around, modal shift, walking, cycling, public transport. And beyond infrastructure and investment and safe passing distances, which are all critical, we also need to make places safe by default so that no one is concerned about letting a child, or indeed themselves going out, that they could be killed or seriously injured in their own communities where they live. we need to be aware of that, I think, and we need to address that. Children, there could be, of course, there's going to be opposition until we can communicate to people the benefits of it and the necessity of it. But who are the people who are opposing it? I think if you were to go into schools and if you were to do a poll of children and to ask their opinions, I think there'd almost be unanimity in favour of 30, because it just makes so much sense. But they're voiceless, unfortunately, and they're forgotten about. So we need to be proactive in making sure that their views are heard as well, not just by people who pay motor tax, because I pay it myself. I'm a former child myself. I couldn't pay it when I was a child. And I don't think paying motor tax necessarily gives you a greater entitlement or rights to the road. I think every one of us as citizens have an equal right to the road, and we all certainly have a right to safety. So, to sum up really, thanks for listening. I hope it's been complimentary to what you've already heard, and I think we have to take action, and it's time for change. Thank you.
So thank you to the last two speakers, and thanks to all the speakers in this session. So we're now getting to the end of the conference. I want to thank everybody for their attention. I'd remind participants to tweet if you wish, keep the conversation going. And I'd like to remind everybody that today's presentations will all be available on the Road Safety Authority website, rsa.ie. So we'd love to have your feedback on the event. You're going to receive a feedback survey via the email that you registered with, and we'd appreciate your thoughts. The feedback will be really appreciated and valued. So finally, I'd like to ask Michael Rowland, Director of Road Safety, Driver Education and Research at the Road Safety Authority, to close out the conference. Michael.
Thanks, Oliver. First of all, it's great to meet everybody in person. It's been a few years, and certainly the conference today, I think, has been great from a networking point of view, but just from speaking to people and, I suppose, feeling the passion for road safety. And I suppose the first thing I'd like to do is to thank Oliver for his emceeing, but also to thank all of our expert speakers who came today and shared their knowledge, their expertise, and their personal stories as well. Really, really appreciate that. Today we've heard from experts from home and abroad, offering their expertise and insights into addressing speeding on our roads. It's heartening to see such close collaboration between agencies with our peers from across the globe to this important aspect of road safety. Since we launched the road safety strategy, we've been making steady strides to embed the safe system approach, and you've heard a lot about the safe system approach here this morning and this afternoon, into our national road safety practice, this is integral to the priority intervention area of safe speeds. Whilst for the most part people do obey speed limits and the laws of the road in Ireland, addressing the dangerous behaviour is critical to the road safety problem we must all give more thought to and act upon. So very, very briefly, what I heard clearly today was, first of all, our Minister, and I'd welcome the increase in the fines, and I think that is to be commended, especially in terms of the doubling of the speeding fines to €160 from midnight to night. She also referenced the speed fallacy and the minuscule benefits of speeding in terms of the benefits that can be derived. So I suppose Sam Wade suggested we were preaching to the converted in this room, but he also said you're all leaders, you're all influencers, and I'd like to challenge all of you with what you've heard here today to go back to your peers, to those people you can influence, to help and assist in terms of speed reduction in Ireland and in terms of the policies that we're talking about introducing here to make Ireland a better and safer country. Velma talked about, she gave a profile of speeding in Ireland, and I suppose I did hear one speaker say what was really distressing was the fact that over 85,000 drivers could not be deterred from speeding. And that is a concern, and a major concern for us. Even though most people are compliant, there is a cohort out there that aren't compliant. And that's where the speed, that's where the penalties come into being. And we need to, hurt people in their pockets before they hurt themselves or hurt others. Then we had Judy. She talked about, the best way I can describe it was compliance initially to conformance. And I thought that was very strong and very striking. And she talked about the role of education. She also talked about the role of enforcement. And then Guru talked about the personal responsibility we have as citizens and the cross-government approach, which I think we have here in Ireland as well. And she talked about appropriate speed limits and, again, the compliance, the enforcement and the campaigns. And she talked about the experience of the average speed cameras in Norway, and I suppose similar to the limited average speed cameras we have here in Ireland, but also the potential of those average speed cameras, and that is an action in our government road safety strategy as well. Rod, you made a physics lesson extremely interesting, and I never expected physics wasn't my best subject going to school, but certainly the way you presented it was a very compelling argument in terms of why we should reduce speed. And you talked about the transfer of energy and whether it's the potential to be a serious or a minor or a serious injury. And I think that gave us all food for thought in a different way. And then we had I suppose, we had Love 30 and Mairead and Justin who gave very compelling, rationale as to why we need to reduce speeds to 30 kilometres in our cities, in our towns and in our villages. And Love 30 have been advocating this for quite some time. They were instrumental in the road safety strategy. I remember reading their submission, and that's reflected in the government road safety strategy in Action 6. And they're following through in terms of reducing speeds and making our cities, our towns more livable, allowing for more active transport or more active travel, and I suppose giving our towns back to our road users. Rod King talked about, that you shouldn't call it, he talked about the spaces between buildings. He didn't refer to them as roads as such, and he talked about the need for us to rethink the way we set speed limits. But he also gave the compelling argument in terms of the what 30 kilometres can do, and the benefits of having it as a default rather than an exception. And he talked about how many lives, and I thought it was a very significant question Rod asked, how many people will be killed if we don't implement the 30-kilometre default speed limit, and need I say any more? And finally, Justin, you talked about three things. You talked about changing the law. You talked about guidelines for the setting of speed limits and some of the need for those guidelines to be reviewed and revised. And you talked about changing attitudes and behaviours, and you gave the examples of your three friends, your three young friends. But I think you said something very compelling for me anyway, apart from your slide of the risk of death if hit by a car. But you said that speed limits are an indication of our values and our identity, and I think that is so important. It also reflects what Rod King was saying earlier when he talked about something very similar. People should be able to go out and play. They should be able to go out and enjoy our streets. They're not the domain, or shouldn't be the domain solely of the car driver. and that we should be giving those streets back to our people. And the final thing I'll say is, you know, it's not just a road safety benefit that's derived from reducing speed limits, it's public health, it is enjoyment of our streets and allowing people to congregate in a safe way and not have to worry about going out and using our streets without fear of death from vehicles speeding on our roads. So once again, thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for staying with us. We've gone slightly over, but not too bad. I'd like to thank everybody. As it was said, we have our presentations and they will be on our website from tomorrow. And yeah, if anybody's any questions or anything else, please feel free to. Okay, thank you.
So, as Michael said, that brings us to the end of today's event. Thanks to all the speakers who travelled here. Thanks to the attendees, stakeholders in attendance, and those that tuned in online. And thanks finally to the Road Safety Authority in Croke Park for putting on a great event. Have a safe and non-speeding journey home.